very directly, I learned, my basic earthen floor knowledge came from Rob Bowman, who learned his knowledge from Bill and Athena, and my understanding, that knowledge came from Anita Rodriguez, who, I love this part of the story, because she was a woman, she was able to work with the women in the pueblos and get the stories of how to make thin coats. Earthen floor poured as thin coats was the main thing I understand. But she gained that knowledge because she was a woman. Traditionally, in those communities, women were the ones installing the floors and installing plasters. And because she was a woman, she was able to receive that information. Because at that point, in the 70s, construction was very quickly going into dominantly male trade. You're going to bring in drain rock, and that can vary in size and shape, but mainly you're creating sort of an aquifer for water to come and go. 3 inches is sort of minimal. It's what you're using to level your first layer of the floor. If you do more than 5 inches, you may want to compact the first 5, put another 5 inches, and compact that. You want to make sure your drain rock is well compacted so that you're creating a stable subfloor. Now that you've laid your rock, you're going to want to lay down a vapor barrier. And that vapor barrier is basically creating a barrier between the area of your floor that it's okay to bring water into, that reservoir, those rocks. Moisture could come into that space and go out. But you don't want any of that moisture to move up through your floor system. So in a floor, there are various options for you to insulate. Here in this video, we are using pumice. Volcanic rock have air pockets in them and can be used as insulation. Similar to all the layers of any earthen floor, you want to level and compact loose material when you're working with a loose insulation, as volcanic rock or pumice is. We've laid our insulation down, and now we're ready to start essentially the earthen floor portion of the structure. What we're going to do in this one is lay down 3 inches of road base as our platform for the earth mix. And road base varies from region to region, but it is an engineered product you could get from a landscape or garden supply yards. And what it is rock and soil and silts. It's different than the drain rock in that it's got all of the sizes from 1 inch or whatever size it is down to fines. If there's no moisture content in it, you'll want to either mix moisture in it or add it. When you're compacting, you'll go from maybe 5 inches of material to 3 inches of material. So it's always good to recheck where you're at and may need to add more as you go. You want to figure out what your clay content is of your soil, and from there base your recipe from that, so that you can mix enough sand with your soil to get about 10% clay content in your finish. You could do that various ways of jar tests to kind of get your starting point of how much clay, or you could actually send soil away and find out, or you could just do by feel and make a few samples. But mainly I start with 2 parts sand, 1 part soil, and do a lot of feel tests to make sure it's just gritty enough. I want a pretty gritty floor. And the sand is like the rocks of a rock wall, and the clay is using a little bit to hold it all together, the mortar. And when you have a sandier mix, you also will have a quicker drying time. The clay holds more of the moisture. It takes a little while for it to get out. The sand doesn't hold that moisture as long. Anyway, lay all the mud out. There's a couple ways of leveling your floor. These are screed boards that are ripped at the height of the floor, 3/4 inch in this situation. We want 3/4 inch floor. You use a rail across the screed boards to give you an estimation of where you're going at a continuous 3/4 inch height. So the screeds, as you'll see, are important to not leave in the mud for very long. You want to work the area and then move on. If you were to have a lunch break or something, you want to make sure you don't leave any screeds in the floor for a while, because the earth will dry up faster around that wood because it's sort of soaking in some of that moisture. And once you fill it back in after you've removed them with a wetter material, then you have that situation of dissimilar moisture content and pretty straight line cracks in the floor. The other industry standard, we'll say, is using a laser level. You set up a laser level and you use a stick in the field, and you make sure that the whole floor is coming to the same height throughout the field. Yeah, this 3/4 inch finish that we've just poured is enough. You can, after you wood float it, as you see, we steel trowel it, and you like to get it as level as possible and as perfect looking as possible that day, and then I come back and I will repress the whole floor the next day. And so that 3/4 inch is the minimal of what you need. It's enough to be a finished floor. What we show in this video, or one of the options, is doing another coat, like a 1/4 inch coat, and you can, in that step, spend some time refining those materials to make a more refined finish. You could have your chopped straw be smaller. You can add more expensive materials, like if you want it to be pigmented with an expensive pigment, you could do a 1/4 inch finish instead of a 3/4 inch finish, and so you are spending less material resource on pigment. I'm just rambling. I'm like, why would you do a second coat? Okay. Right? So the main reason I do just a 3/4 inch finish and refine that to it's done is that I'm trying to, from 3/4 inch finish mud to people walking on it, 2.5 weeks. There's a pretty steep learning curve in how to work with clay, because for one, there's hundreds of types of clay, and so you have to start to understand how to see what your clay body's going to do. And I thought I had gotten that down. I had been using the same clay body in Portland for years, and so I knew it was 2 parts sand to 1 part clay, but 1 part dry clay is what I always did. And then one day I did a floor, and all we had access to was that same clay body, but it was soaking wet. So we did 2 parts sand to 1 part clay body, and the floor was like a lake bed. It cracked everywhere. The floor is now ready for oil. It's all dry, your color's on, it's looking beautiful, and it's ready to be oiled. Drying oils are what we use on earthen floors. Drying oils are oils that polymerize as they dry, meaning they interact with oxygen and turn into long polymer chains, giving them flexibility and strength. So drying oils that are typically used are linseed oil and tung oil in floors. Also a solvent in the floor oil to help the oil that's sticky and thick get deep into the floor. It's feminine in its sense of flexibility. Like, you could sculpt it, and you could have your kids around, you could have your grandparents around, you could have people around and not feel like it's too dangerous. The aesthetic of an earthen floor is like no other floor, both visually, up close as well as far. It's got just a subtle feel. You can tell it's been touched by a human hand. And then walking on it, you know, we work to make them flat, but there's still that touch of the human hand has laid that floor, and you can feel it.